The morning Elliot Voss walked out to his field and found every single row of his wheat crop lying flat on the ground, twisted, yellowed, and stone dead. He sat down in the dirt and did not get up for a very long time. He was 61 years old. He had farmed this land in the valley of Greystone Hollow, nestled between the rolling hills of rural Vermont, for 34 years. He had survived droughts, early frosts, flooding rains, and one particularly vicious outbreak of aphids that had nearly taken his entire harvest of 1999. But he had never seen anything like this. 300 acres of winter wheat gone overnight, no storm, no flood, just dead. His neighbor, a broad-shouldered man named Curtis Dray, came over that morning and stood at the edge of the field with his thumbs in his suspenders. He looked for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "Elliot, I think the land's done with you." Two other neighbors stopped by before noon. Old Pete Harmon, who had farmed the Ridge property for 50 years, shook his head slowly and said, "Soil's exhausted. I've seen it happen. Nothing left to give." And Marla Fenwick, who ran a small dairy operation 2 miles down the road, brought over a casserole and spoke quietly about how maybe it was time to think about selling. By nightfall, the word in town was simple: Voss Farm was finished. Elliot did not sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table where his late wife Doris had once spread seed catalogs across every inch of the surface, circling tomato varieties and arguing with him about whether they should plant more garlic. The table felt too wide now. Everything felt too wide. He pulled out his soil notebooks, thick binders he had kept since the early years, recording pH levels, compost applications, rainfall amounts, and crop rotation schedules. He read through them until 3 in the morning. Something was wrong, yes, but he could not accept that the land was simply done. Land did not just give up. He had not given it cause to. He was still sitting there when the knock came at his door at 6:47 in the morning. He almost didn't answer it. But some old instinct built from decades of early mornings and unexpected visitors made him push back his chair. The man standing on his porch was perhaps 70, though he carried his age the way old oak trees carry theirs, not as decline, but as depth. He was lean, weathered, with pale gray eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a canvas field bag slung over one shoulder. He wore mud-caked boots and a jacket the color of pine bark. "You're Elliot Voss," the man said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Elliot said. "And you are?" "Silas Greer." He extended a hand. "I study soil. I heard about your field." Elliot looked at him for a moment. "News travels." "I was already in the county," Silas said. "I've been watching soil conditions across 6 townships this season. Yours isn't the first field I've seen go like this. May I walk it with you?" Elliot Voss was not a man who trusted easily, but he had nothing left to lose, and there was something about the quietness of this stranger, the lack of pity in his voice, that felt different from every conversation he'd had the day before. "Give me 5 minutes," Elliot said. "Coffee's on." As the morning mist was still hanging low over the hills. Silas Greer said very little at first. He crouched at intervals, pressing his fingers into the soil, lifting clumps and crumbling them, holding them to the light. He pulled a small kit from his canvas bag and conducted 3 separate tests right there in the field, recording results in a small notebook. Elliot watched him work and felt something he hadn't felt in 24 hours: curiosity. Finally, Silas stood and looked across the dead rows. "Your soil hasn't given up, Mr. Voss. It's been chemically disrupted." Elliot frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means something shifted your soil's biology, not from neglect, from compounding pressure." Silas crouched again and held up a clump. "You see how this breaks? Powdery, no cohesion. Your soil structure has collapsed. The aggregates, the little clusters that hold air pockets and water channels, are gone. Your microbiome is severely depleted." "My microbiome," Elliot repeated. "The living community inside your soil," Silas said. "Bacteria, fungi, nematodes, earthworms. They are not side characters, Mr. Voss. They are the farm. Without them, roots can't access nutrients even if those nutrients are present. Your wheat didn't starve from lack of fertilizer. It suffocated from lack of life. This was the beginning of Elliot's education. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Let's get back to our story. Over the following weeks, Silas Greer did not leave. He set up what he called a field laboratory in Elliot's barn, running daily soil tests and mapping the property in sections. He explained, patiently and in plain language, what had happened and why it was happening to farms across the region. Modern farming, Silas told him one evening at the kitchen table, improved yields enormously in the 20th century, but it came with costs we are still reckoning with. Heavy tillage breaks up the fungal networks underground. Synthetic nitrogen used repeatedly begins to acidify the soil and suppresses the microbial communities that naturally fix nitrogen. Pesticides don't discriminate. They kill the harmful organisms, yes, but they also kill the beneficial ones. Elliot had used all of these methods, like everyone else he knew, like his father before him. "So what do we do?" he asked. Silas smiled a quiet, steady smile. "We bring the life back." The plan Silas laid out was not quick, and it was not simple. But as he explained, each step, Elliot found himself writing in his notebook, with the same urgency he'd had as a young man first learning the land. The first principle was cover cropping. Rather than leaving the dead wheat field bare through the winter, they planted a mixture of winter rye, hairy vetch, and crimson clover. These were not cash crops. They were soil crops, planted with the express purpose of feeding the ground. Cover crops do several things at once, Silas explained. They prevent erosion. Their roots break up compaction. As they decompose, they add organic matter, and legumes like vetch and clover fix nitrogen directly from the air. They essentially manufacture fertilizer underground for free. Elliot had used cover crops before, occasionally, almost as an afterthought. He had never understood them as the foundation of a system. The second principle was reducing tillage. This one was harder for Elliot to accept. He had tilled every spring for 34 years. The sight of freshly turned dark earth was, to him, the definition of a farm being cared for. Silas showed him why that instinct, while understandable, was working against him. "When you till," Silas said, drawing in Elliot's notebook, "you are destroying what took years to build. The fungal networks called mycorrhizae grow in threads thinner than hair through your soil. They connect with plant roots and extend them by hundreds of times. They trade water and minerals for carbon. They are one of the most efficient systems in nature, and every time you run a tiller through that ground, you shred them." Reduced tillage or no-till farming, as it was practiced in some operations, allowed those networks to persist, grow, and deepen over time. The third principle was compost and biological inoculants. Silas arranged for a delivery of high-quality compost made from wood chips, food waste, and aged manure. But more unusually, he introduced Elliot to something called mycorrhizal inoculants, concentrated preparations of beneficial fungi that could be applied directly to seeds or soil to jumpstart the underground networks. "We are, in effect, replanting the invisible forest beneath your field," Silas said. The fourth principle was water management. Silas identified a subtle but critical problem. Water was running off the field too quickly during heavy rains and not infiltrating deeply enough. The compacted soil was acting like a slightly tilted parking lot. He showed Elliot how to install simple contour swales, shallow trenches running along the field's natural contour lines that would slow water down and encourage it to sink in rather than flow away. A 1% increase in your soil's organic matter content allows it to hold an additional 20,000 gallons of water per acre, Silas said. "You've been in drought stress every dry summer, not because of the weather alone, but because your soil lost its ability to store what fell on it." Curtis Dre came by in the third week and found Elliot and Silas on their knees in the field, hand-broadcasting cover crop seed. "What on earth are you two doing?" Curtis asked. "Farming," Elliot said. Curtis stood watching with the expression of a man watching someone rearrange chairs on a sinking ship, but he stayed long enough to ask a few questions. By the end of the conversation, he was sitting on the tailgate of Elliot's truck, listening to Silas explain the nitrogen cycle. He came back the next day with his own notebook. The winter passed quietly. The cover crop germinated and spread a soft green carpet across the dead field. Beneath the surface, things were changing slowly, invisibly, the way all real change happens. Elliot spent the winter reading. Silas left him a stack of books and a list of research papers. He read about Masanobu Fukuoka, the Japanese farmer who had revolutionized thinking about natural agriculture. He read about the work of Dr. Elaine Ingham, a soil microbiologist whose research had shifted understanding of the soil food web. He read about regenerative agriculture, a term that had once seemed to him like something from a magazine he'd flipped past, and began to understand it as a practical science with measurable, replicable results. He called his daughter, Nora, who lived in Portland and worked as a high school science teacher. "Dad," she said, after he had talked for 40 minutes, "you sound like a completely different person." "I feel like one," he admitted. "I feel like I've been farming the same piece of land for 30 years, and only just now started to understand what it is." Spring came, and with it the true test. They terminated the cover crop by rolling it flat with a borrowed equipment attachment, leaving the biomass as a mulch layer on the surface, suppressing weeds naturally, protecting soil moisture, and feeding the organisms below as it decomposed. They planted corn using a no-till drill, a specialized machine that cut narrow slots through the mulch and deposited seeds without disturbing the soil. The seeds had been treated with mycorrhizal inoculant before planting. For 6 weeks, nothing visible happened. The mulch lay flat and dull. Elliot walked the rows every morning with the complicated feeling of a man who has gambled everything on something he cannot yet see. Curtis Dre drove by twice, slowed down and drove on. Old Pete Harmon told a mutual friend that Elliot Voss had gone strange in his grief. And then, in the 7th week, the corn emerged. Not just emerged, erupted. Row after row of deep green, thick-stem plants rising with a vigor that Elliot had not seen on this land in years. He stood in the field and turned in a slow circle, and for the first time since that terrible morning, his chest felt open. Silas drove up that afternoon and walked the rows with him without speaking for a long time. "The mycorrhizal network found the roots," Silas finally said. "Look at the color. That's not nitrogen deficiency, that's not stress. That's a plant with full biological support." By August, the field was the talk of the county. Not because it was magic, not because of luck, but because the results were measurable and visible and real. The corn yield that first year was not the highest Elliot had ever produced. Silas had told him not to expect miracles in year 1, but it was strong and clean, and the soil tests told the deeper story. Organic matter had increased by 0.3% in a single season. Microbial activity was up significantly. Water infiltration had improved. The compaction layers were beginning to break down. "This takes time," Silas reminded him. 3 years. You will not recognize this field. 5 years. It will outperform anything you've ever done here. Curtis Dre, who had quietly adopted the cover crop rotation on his own backfield, confirmed his suspicions by showing up at Elliot's barn one evening with a bottle of... "Ask Elliot to lend you the books," Silas said. In September, the local agricultural extension office heard about the experiment at Voss Farm and sent a young field officer named Daphne Kroll to take a look. She arrived expecting to write a brief report. She stayed 3 days. "What you've done here," she told Elliot, "is essentially a demonstration of every principle we now know to be most important for long-term soil health. You've applied it practically, in a real working farm, in under a year." "I had a good teacher," Elliot said. Silas, who was packing up his field laboratory that same week, shook his head. "You had good land that was waiting to be listened to. I only told you how to listen." Silas Greer left on a Tuesday morning in late September, heading west to a degraded farm in Minnesota, where a family had reached out to him. He drove an old blue truck with soil test kits rattling in the back and a canvas bag on the passenger seat. Elliot shook his hand at the end of the driveway. "I owe you more than I can say," Elliot told him. "You owe me nothing," Silas said. "But if you know a farmer in trouble, send them the books before they lose hope." Elliot nodded. "I know several." He did send the books, and he did more than that. That winter, Elliot Voss converted his barn into a meeting space and invited every farmer within 20 miles to come and listen to what he had learned. 12 came the first time, 23 the second time. By spring he had hosted 5 sessions and driven to 2 neighboring counties to speak at agricultural meetings. He was not a scientist. He did not pretend to be, but he had something perhaps more persuasive, a feel that had come back from the dead, and 34 years of experience to put it in context. He spoke about the soil microbiome, the community of bacteria and fungi that makes nutrient exchange possible. He spoke about mycorrhizal networks and how they extend roots and move water and minerals with breathtaking efficiency. He spoke about organic matter as the foundational metric of soil health and how every 0.1% gained was worth far more than any short-term yield bump from synthetic inputs alone. He spoke about cover crops, reduced tillage, compost, and water retention. But more than the techniques, he spoke about a way of thinking. "We were taught to think of soil as a growing medium," he told his barn full of neighbors one February evening, lanterns glowing and coats still on. "A container for roots, something to put seeds in. But it's not that. It is the most complex living system on the surface of this planet. 1 teaspoon of healthy soil contains more microorganisms than there are people on Earth. When that system is working, your farm works. When it is broken, no amount of chemical input will fix it. You are treating symptoms without addressing the cause." He paused and looked around the room. "I almost quit because I didn't understand what I was standing on. I almost sold this land because I didn't know it was alive." The following spring, 3 farms in Greystone Hollow began their first cover crop rotations. Curtis Dre converted 2 of his 4 fields to no-till. Marla Fenwick, who had brought Elliot a casserole on the day his farm was declared finished, invited him to walk her fields and tell her what he saw. Old Pete Harmon, who had farmed the ridge for 50 years and told Elliot the soil was exhausted, sat down with him at the diner in town and said, slowly and with the dignity of a man admitting a hard thing, "I didn't know what I didn't know." "Neither did I," Elliot said. "Neither did I." 5 years after the morning he sat down in the dirt of his dead field, Elliot Voss had the highest organic matter readings in the county. His water bills were down. His input costs were significantly lower. His yields were steady and improving. The earthworm population in his soil, a simple and powerful indicator of biological health, had tripled. He still kept his notebooks, now filled with 5 years of recovery data that Daphne Kroll had helped him compile into a case study used by the Extension Office in training sessions. And he still had the table where Doris had spread her seed catalogs. Some evenings he spread his own notebooks across it, reading back through the years the way you read back through a long and complicated letter, looking for the thread that connects the beginning to where you are now. He thought often about Silas Greer, where he was, what fields he was walking, what farmers he was pulling back from the edge. He had received 1 postcard from Minnesota, then one from Eastern Oregon. Both said the same thing, in the same spare handwriting. The land responds, "Keep going." Elliot kept going. He was 66 years old. He understood his farm for the first time, and the work, for the first time in a long time, felt like exactly what it was supposed to feel like. It felt like a conversation, long, patient, and alive. What Elliot learned and what every farmer, gardener, or steward of land can take from his story is this: the soil is not a tool. It is a partner. And like any partnership, it requires listening, patience, and the humility to accept that the most important activity on a farm is the one happening 6 inches underground, in the dark, without any fanfare at all. The science of soil health is not new, the practice of it is simply waiting to be remembered.